Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and this is the Purple Insider Fantasy Show with Mike Schopp, WGR 550 in Buffalo, and the Deep End Fantasy Football Podcast. Mike, do you want to talk about TJ Hawkinson or something? Because I don't really want to break down the Jaguars-Vikings game anymore. I'm trying to move on, not only just to the next week, but also emotionally from having seen that in person.
You got lucky, but also Jacksonville got lucky to not get blown out. I mean, it was definitely, if it were gymnastics, there was no scoreboard, but you're just watching the game, and after 3 hours, you and your fellow media members have to judge which team should have won the game, was the better team. Minnesota would have won unanimously. But, football is more interesting and more random than gymnastics. So fantasy-wise, it was really tough because we lost Aaron Jones. We never got close with Jefferson. We never seemed to get anywhere with Addison anymore. Depending on your league scoring, the Darnold interceptions could have been a problem. He was pretty startable in that matchup. But Hawkinson was, that was fine. And that might have saved some people when it came to the Vikings. But I got to a point on Sunday where I was watching that game just hoping that they would win for my survivor picks. I don't care about the cover. Fantasy-wise, I'll take what I get. Jefferson is, such a sure thing that you take for granted that there won't be games like that. But, of course, again, the randomness there should be. So you won, shake it off, on to Tennessee.
That's the only way you could really look at it. The one development that was kind of interesting, and I really noticed this as I was looking back at the coaches tape, is that Jacksonville played their safeties deeper than I've ever seen a team ever do this ever. That there are passes to TJ Hawkinson that Darnold is throwing when he is going to release the football. Both safeties are 30 yards away from him. They were so afraid of Justin Jefferson hitting on a deep shot. And I think part of it was, hey, we're going to make Sam Darnold throw underneath over and over and over again and see if he could do it without making a mistake. And I guess they won that bet because he did end up making the mistakes in the red zone. But I am curious if there is something to this with other teams trying to do it to the Vikings and try to do this to Justin Jefferson. It's not like they've never thought of it before, but they did it to an extreme. They blitzed one time in 42 dropbacks by Sam Darnold. And I do think that could impact the amount of explosive plays that they can get.
No, sure. I mean, that's been the general trend in the league the last couple of years, is to just put the safeties in the proverbial parking lot and make your opponent drive the field. And if turnovers happen, the game gets shorter because your drives are longer and you lose. One thing about Kansas City this year is they're not scoring. Everybody wants to know why, what's the problem? They keep the ball and they haven't turned it over. Well, they actually have with Mahomes, but that's the pitfall. That's what you have to avoid. And a team that's so minimized, if that's a word, on talent at this point and even incentive might as well play that way. I think you might have been in Buffalo with me for a game in the Bills' many drought years. They went to Indianapolis one year against Peyton Manning's Colts, maybe 2008 or 9, somewhere in there with Dick Duran. And they just were no match for the Colts, but they just slow played it and hoped to get away with it. And they lost 17-16, I think. So, they gave themselves a lot of credit and it all counted the same. So for Minnesota offensively, what do you want? Hawkinson is really key here. You want an underneath option. You want pivots. Maybe Addison just really isn't it. Addison is supposed to be, I'm not here to tell you this, but he's supposed to be the player that can stretch the defense. And that's where you can get Jefferson on that intermediate stuff where he cleans up most weeks. So I don't know why that didn't happen, but that's what the Vikings would probably want going forward. Some pivot that's easier, and you avoid the interceptions. If you avoid the interceptions in that game, what's the final score?
I think probably 27-7. I mean, it would have been a blowout, a complete blowout. And also they didn't finish the other drives too. They had to kick 4 field goals.
Yeah,
so
right.
if they had scored, even if they had scored field goals on every drive, they still would have won by 2 scores at least if they didn't throw the interceptions. And, I was looking back at the picks because, of course, this is the freak out in Minnesota is, is he going to do this every week with these interceptions? I would say 2 of them were, I don't know, it's just something that happens. He misread which direction Jefferson was going after the play broke down a little bit on one of them. And then another is a tip that ends up getting picked off. And then there's one really bad Sam Darnold decision. But I don't think that it's something that's going to happen week after week after week. It's just when it happens like that against that team, it feels like a catastrophe. But the Jordan Addison thing is interesting to talk about because he put something on Instagram, free 3. So then everyone talks about, okay, is he demanding a trade or whatever right before the deadline? And it just doesn't seem to be happening with him and Darnold. Darnold's first look is always at number 18. Of course, it should be that way. And then he's got instant trust with TJ Hawkinson. All right, it's not deep. Where's TJ? I'm going to get him the football. And there was one opportunity to hit Addison on a 20 or 25-yard pass that he just kind of overthrew. They just have not ever gotten on the same page. People were worried about suspensions with Addison. No surprise, they pushed the court date back. But I think it's more of he just doesn't seem to have Addison in the front of mind when it comes to each play. He's dropping back thinking about pretty much 2 guys. And I don't know if that's ever going to change. You see ebbs and flows with guys that are number 2s in terms of targets, but there's only ebbs. There's no flows when it comes to Addison this year.
Hawkinson makes that tougher. There will be that. There already has shown that. I mean, Addison has 1 game all season with more than 3 catches, and Hawkinson topped that, 6, 7 on Sunday? Like, that's plan B now. Do you think Minnesota would ever move Naylor into that spot? Is he just different body type, or just is there a reason why, beyond the draft capital stuff, where they necessarily wouldn't do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because when Naylor was wide receiver 2, he was getting the football.
Right.
And we were talking about it like, oh yeah, Jalen Naylor's kind of becoming this secondary option. And then as soon as Addison came back, neither one of them really got the football very often. Naylor might have as many catches as Trent Sherfield over the last 3 or 4 weeks. He has kind of become a ghost in this too. It's really just Jefferson or Hawkinson or Jefferson on any given play. And both of them have kind of washed each other out. I think that Naylor might be a better fit for this pure wide receiver 2 type of position if you're going to play this way. And I was thinking about the Los Angeles Rams and where Kevin O'Connell came from in 2021. They just threw the ball to Cooper Kupp every single time. And Van Jefferson might sneak in a target or whoever else, but it was very much a wide receiver 1 centric kind of thing, just like it was in Green Bay with Devontae Adams. And that might be how things are designed to play. And then what do you do with Addison? Because at this point, I don't condone Instagramming your feelings when it comes to targets. I don't. No, I've always been strongly against that. But
I feel like you've done that many times.
Yeah.
Yourself. So.
I have posted my own thoughts online, just like everybody else. That's true. But I think he's got a point. I mean, he's a first-round pick. He was a dominant player in college. He scores 10 touchdowns, 70 catches last year. He has to be looking around going, am I just running a track meet out here?
Well, right. And I mean, it's a cliche. It's well beyond a cliche at this point, but with wide receivers, I guess you really need to care about their feelings all the time. Addison, as you know, I mean, he's still only 22. It's just super young. He's probably, if he's like a lot of these guys, just already thinking about his next contract. He's on a team that's paid Jefferson, so it's maybe not going to happen there, and that could get sticky for a team. From the Viking side of things, look, I mean, they're 7-2. It's been a great ride so far. Darnold is working out. They lost, of course, their rookie quarterback investment before the season isn't started, and they're just running really well here. These last 2 games, more so the Jacksonville game, but in totality, really not that pretty What are the total yards? 817 to 370. Like, those are blowouts. If you run the Sims, sorry to get like AI on you, but if you run the Sims on games like that 100 times, I mean, the Vikings win those games 95 times out of 100, if not more. So, I mean, maybe. So I think, overall, you have a team here where if I owned it, or if I just sort of was in charge of it, even if I just being the coach in sort of like a macro sense, I wouldn't be afraid to move around, figure a new plan out with that wide receiver 2 position, because your present right now is more important than down the road. And Addison could end up being somebody that just sort of gets kind of phased out eventually by the Vikings. In terms of fantasy football, he's maybe an interesting so-called buy low. We're at the point of the fantasy season where leagues are starting to have trade deadlines, and with dynasty leagues where you always have teams that are winners and losers, contenders, teams pushing for a championship. They might want to invest in older wide receivers. Calvin Ridley, maybe for Tennessee, who you'll see this week. And, you have Addison. There are better examples, younger receivers on the other side of that. Trades like that happen all the time in dynasty and fantasy. So Addison could be somebody that a contending team was sort of counting on when the season started. And maybe now, I'm not saying you have to give up, but you could maybe try to turn him into somebody that's producing more regularly in the present.
Friends, gifting is hard, but here's a hint. Give the gift of connection from US Cellular. Not sure what that means? Here's a slightly more specific hint. You could choose 4 free phones and get 4 lines for $90 a month from US Cellular. Your family wants new phones? How do we know? They told us. The good news is that compared to wrapping presents, you're great at taking hints. So take a hint and get 4 free phones and 4 lines for $90 a month. US Cellular, built for us. Ready to kick off some extra fun on football Sundays? Grab Catan and keep the action going off the field. While Minnesota's football teams are crushing it, you and your crew can build, trade, and outsmart each other in the ultimate game of strategy. Whether it's during halftime or between big plays, Catan brings a whole new level of competition and excitement to your game day. Visit CatanShop.com and use the coupon code PURPLE to get a 10% discount off Catan for a limited time. Again, CatanShop.com, coupon code PURPLE to get a 10% discount on Catan for a limited time only. Have you ever tried to explain football to a little kid? It can be near impossible to make it make sense sometimes, but there is help. I want to tell you about Future Fans, a new brand that helps little kids become big football fans with storybook-led activity boxes. Let me explain to you what that means. You get a football playbook that not only explains the game, but also has a ton of different activities to help better understand how football works. I have a good friend whose son is 7 years old and he's just getting into flag football, and they have loved playing game watch bingo together during games and drawing up their own plays on the laminated play sheet that comes in the box. That's been his son's favorite part so far, but there's so much more to it. There's a beanbag toss game with 4 tries to teach the downs in football, and then later that connects back to the storybook itself. There's coloring pages, brain teasers, mix and match games, all sorts of things for endless hours of football fun. My friend and his son have had so much fun with it. Now his son is asking, when can we watch football again? And luckily for him, it's on just about every day. If you want to share your love for football with a little one, your kid, grandkid, niece, and nephew, Future Fans is the best gift for a sports fan and their little one this holiday season. It's only $49.99 at futurefans.com. Use the code PURPLE, though, and you get 10% off. Again, futurefans.com, code PURPLE, and unlock a lifetime of memories with a kid in your life starting now. And I also think that sometimes we've seen this before where a guy doesn't take center stage for a big part of the season and then all of a sudden does. I mean, if defenses are going to play Jefferson this way, there are opportunities to throw to other people, and it doesn't always have to be TJ Hawkinson. I guess I'm really more wondering about Sam Darnold and whether he looks for number 3 or not as part of this. But I also think that when you have wide receiver ones, they're going to get consistent targets, at least 10, 12 per game, and everybody else just kind of rides high or low. And this happened with KJ Osborne in 2022. Halfway through the season, at this point, we're talking about what happened to that guy. Well, he just disappeared from last year. And then you look at his final numbers, and they are actually really similar to his breakout 2021 season, because that's the way that the cookie crumbled. This team also, if they're going to run like that, which I promote, if you're running effectively, keep doing it, keep hanging on to the football. There's no reason to make it easy on the other team. And you're going to throw short to Hockenson. There's just only going to be so much to go around. And there's going to have to be weeks for someone like Addison where he doesn't get as many targets. So I don't know if there's an easy answer here.
It's another one, too, as we've talked about a lot this year, where the Vikings are too good to set up perfectly for like a big play wide receiver because they're not in those game scripts. You can run 5 yards per carry all the time, but if I'm the Jaguars last week, I want you to do it. Like, you're just giving me a better chance to punch you out once, make one play, and beat you. So that doesn't set up well for Addison. And if you think, and I don't know why you wouldn't, it's the Titans and the Bears the next 2 weeks. I mean, that could be 10 points per max. Who knows? The way the Vikings are playing, I mean, that doesn't set up, even for Jefferson, that doesn't set up great. One more thing on Minnesota, unless you have like 7 others, which you might because this is actually Purple Insider. You were saying all summer into the season, they're just not keen on Chandler. And the 1 week when they went to LA, we had some fun with the pick'ems, and you're like, a Cam Akers touchdown here is not unreasonable because the coach loves him back in Los Angeles. That didn't happen. It was a different, closer game than it could have been. But what you saw Sunday was Akers clearly running ahead of Chandler. So he's obviously at this point the handcuff to Jones.
Right. And if somebody is looking for a pickup fantasy wise and you have an injured running back or something like that, I mean, Aaron Jones was banged up again the other day with a rib injury, and he's not a big man. I can understand why he always has this kind of follow him because he plays recklessly and he's not a huge dude and doesn't run over people. But it's clearly Akers. Kevin O'Connell loves Akers. He makes that clear. He trusts him. That's the biggest thing. And honestly, I would too, in comparison, when you look at the pass protection and just the fact that Akers knows where to run. I mean, a lot of times with Ty Chandler, if you could get him a pitch in space, he can fly by everybody. But that's really the only thing he's capable of doing. So it is definitely Cam Akers going forward. Well, anyway, I guess we'll have to see about these next 2 weeks because I think they could also follow a low scoring type of script as well. They're just not playing Kirk Cousins football games from the past where he's throwing 45 times and he's racking up 380 yards and still somehow you win 24-21 on a last second drive.
No, very different.
It's not happening.
But they will be playing against Kirk Cousins. Like the Vikings schedule. Is this ever perfect? You got to love playing the AFC South. I mean, who doesn't win the lottery playing against the AFC South, most years? Tennessee, which a Vikings win would mean sweeping that division. Chicago, this 3-game road trip, then 3 in a row at home. Arizona, okay. I think Minnesota right now this week would still be favored. Atlanta, Chicago again, at Seattle, Green Bay, and then at Detroit. I mean, what's the over-under going to be on that? Like 11.5 wins? Is that even conservative on Minnesota? That's a playoff team. So if Detroit's too good, then Detroit's too good. But if that's the case and we're sort of right on the Vikings, you're the 5 seed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they could be going on the road to face somebody who's not as good as them and
Tampa.
be favored. Yeah. I mean, Tampa,
Atlanta.
Arizona, Atlanta. I mean, all of that would be a very good situation for getting a win there. Let's stick with that theme, though, and talk about some key players on opponents that are upcoming for the Vikings, because I would love to hear your opinion on Chicago. Oh. I'm constantly talking about Chicago and what's going on over there because the NFC North, and I just can't believe they did it again. I mean, I should have believed that they would do it again, but do you not learn the lessons of the past? Don't stick with the coach who's on the hot seat when you draft the quarterback. That should be basic. You hire a coach for the quarterback, try to make it the best marriage you possibly can. Instead, they stick with Eberflus now. They're already firing an offensive coordinator. And also, I think that maybe the world that anointed Caleb Williams the next great Mahomes probably overlooked some things. Like, he's not as big as Mahomes, and he's not as good from the pocket as Mahomes. And he's also 21 years old and is going to need a lot of development. But I would love your opinion on what has transpired there.
Right. Mahomes did get that first season to watch from the sideline, and there is value in that. I think nobody says there isn't, but it's really more just the math of the rookie deal stuff. And also, to your point, which I completely agree with, well, I'd always want to align my rookie quarterback with a new coach. And the Bears, kind of incredibly, have failed to do that 3 times in the last, what year was Mahomes? 17 in the last 7 years. Trubisky went into a John Fox Bears team, which is kind of incredible. He's fired the next year for Nagy. That runs its course. Then Fields is drafted into a lame duck Nagy season. They start Andy Dalton. That gets screwed up from the beginning. He's fired, of course. And now Williams, the prodigal Caleb Williams, gets another Matt. Who even is Matt Eberflus? Like, I mean, when he was hired, like, everybody went to, like, who is that? And he cut his hair and he trimmed his beard, which obviously I should also do, which would help my profile, but it doesn't really, ultimately didn't add up in success on the field, and that's doomed. So I'm not, again, sort of in a fantasy context, I am totally fine with Caleb Williams. I'm not into curses. I'm not into, any sort of like overriding belief that the Bears can never do it. But it's a miserable first season. Now they have made that coaching change at coordinator. We've talked a couple times. It's easy to say, right, that the coach is to blame, but it's just like the way they're using DJ Moore, they're weird right from the beginning of the season, a purposeful effort to get Gerald Everett involved when they had Moore and Odunze and Keenan Allen and even Kmet and Swift. Like, what? The red flags from the first game, which they won against Tennessee. They sucked out and won that game. But, I mean, it's just it's a miserable thing. And their schedule, talking about Minnesota's, Chicago's, I want to do this from memory. Green Bay, Minnesota, Detroit, San Francisco, Minnesota, Detroit, Seattle, and then Green Bay again. Like, it's gonna go bad. Buffalo, where I'm centered, is like an ironic, maybe counterpoint to this idea, because here is Josh Allen, who was drafted 1 year into McDermott. And so I never liked that. I mean, that was one reason why I was not betting on the Bills to have that kind of success or anything close to what they're actually having. But McDermott had a very lucky first year where they were minus 50 something in point differential, but they made the playoffs in a franchise that had missed for 17 years in a row. Like, that's huge clout. So he had time to make it work with Allen. If that team goes 6-10 or something like that, which by numbers they probably should have, then that's a different deal. And maybe Allen gets played differently, and who knows what happens. I mean, Darnold is a great example of just how fickle the whole thing is. So with the Bears, the coaching change is inevitable. Will they be willing to sort of, if you will, go modern with their choices next time and kind of just be sort of a cutting edge team? That's a big question. And maybe Chicago is sort of loath to that, but they need to do it to give Williams a chance, because the one of the worst results I've had in fantasy this year is, leaning into the Bears, because it couldn't be going worse.
No, it could. And they talked about how, well, this is the best setup that any number one overall pick has ever had. And that probably wasn't wrong when you looked at the weapons that were around him. And it's always tough for me with Shane Waldron. I don't know his previous philosophies and why this worked or that didn't work or anything else. But I always struggle with, hey, it's the coordinator, it's the system, it's the whatever, because a lot of these systems work the same with a little bit of tweaks. I mean, that's just the reality of the NFL. There's Mike Zimmer used to say this. There's only so many things that actually work in the NFL. The game is so fast. The players are so good, because they would ask him about, well, why don't you do this thing that they're doing in college? And that was his answer, is that's phenomenal. And it would lose 10 yards in the NFL because they'll just sack you or whatever. And so I always struggle to think that Shane Waldron, who's here in the NFL calling plays, is so far behind everybody else in what they're doing. I think that the quarterback wasn't ready, and they had no choice because the fan base was down bad after they had to get rid of another draft pick. And Eberflus, here we are, hot seat. He's got to have the hype. He can't play some backup quarterback like the Patriots. They changed coaches. I think they did it great. Play Brissett until you can't anymore. Give Drake May his time. Then he finally comes in without the starting from day one, and he learns how things work. That was good. But also the new coach gets the leeway there. And also I think, there are just some coaches who seem to be really good at galvanizing the team. And Matt Eberflus is not one of those dudes, beard or no beard, haircut or no haircut. He clearly, you don't see coaches that are good and have the team on their side get called out the way that he did after that Hail Mary thing. If that happened to Tomlin, I don't think that we would have a bunch of players run into the media being like, they're stupid, see what they're doing? That was a lot of built up frustration from everybody coming out after that Hail Mary. And then now it's just tumbling, and Caleb Williams, what is to even be made of what's going to happen here going forward? Because he's going to have a new coach. Are they going to pick Lincoln Riley and then do that thing again?
Maybe, but respectfully to the Zimmer point, there is also, I think, a sort of like a fundamental belief, or, whatever it is. DJ Moore, the Bills drafted, I'm always here with the Bills comp, but the Bills drafted Sammy Watkins. They traded up, 2 firsts for Sammy Watkins. They had to have Sammy Watkins in a Beckham draft and Mike Evans. They had to have Sammy Watkins. So, okay, what are you going to do with it? And he really was just not at the center of their offense. He was not a decoy either per se, but remember being on the air that year, you need 15 targets a week or else why bother? And it was anything but that. So you make this great, massive investment at wide receiver. You steal Keenan Allen to see what he's got left. You get lucky with the Odunze pick, having the second pick. And then, in the first 10 or whatever it was. And then DJ Moore, who you robbed from Carolina, you have to give into that. I mean, even if it's not your philosophy or whatever it is you think, it's going to get windy in December. No, there's no excuse. Whatever the concepts are going to be, you have to throw the ball to DJ Moore down the field way more often than they do. They're using him like he's, a third down running back or a tight end or something. And there's just no excuse for that. If you're going to go down, you can't, especially if you're a coach individually, this is your career, you can't not go down being sort of leaning into your best guys. And who would say that he's not one? Who would say that Gerald Everett is more, dangerous or important to the offense than DJ Moore? So that now you have Moore walking off the field. And now you just have this, like you're saying, this general distrust, if that's even being kind, in what the Bears are doing. And it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it sort of makes sense. Eberflus, he doesn't have the good name. He's not Dan Campbell. He doesn't have the good name either, where it's just like, all right, he's tall and big and the good name, the good face. He tried with the beard and the hair, but it's not helping him with the good face. Yeah, they're going to have to start again. And I'm not giving up on Williams. He is so young, like you said, did not get any time to watch and learn, so to speak. So I'm still okay there, but it's a disastrous rookie year again.
I guess the only question I have, and I don't know this, I need, this will be next week when I get Bears reporters on the show, is it that there's no design to throw to DJ Moore, or is Caleb not throwing it? And that's because I see him in the pocket, take the snap, eyes drop, scramble, or just get that ball out of my hands so fast. I don't want anything to do with this noise. And that's where, when it comes out that some players, DJ Moore, want Tyson Bagent to start. I mean, I saw Tyson Bagent play. The guy has guts. He'll throw it. He stinks, but he's got guts. And I think that maybe that's part of the point. That made me think maybe it's not all the offensive coordinator, but I don't know. I wonder how many people get, even like Bryce Young, like Frank Reich gets fired, and then you watch Bryce Young play again, and he's still averaging about 5 yards a pass when he's back there. Is it really the coordinator? I always struggle with that.
And there's always the line too, right? I mean, Chicago's been down tackles. They've been down up front this year, which never helps, and it can be disastrous. So, yeah, not great.
No, it's not. But an upcoming opponent for the Vikings December 1st actually is playing great, the Arizona Cardinals. And this was one that you and I talked about a lot in the summertime. Like, wonder what Kyler Murray's going to be. And I've heard really good things, because he used to be here in Minnesota, about Jonathan Gannon. From multiple people have said, just give him time, watch him. Don't worry about a few weird internet clips. Like, he knows what he's doing. I'm like, okay. And I think that has come to fruition here, especially with that offense. And they run the ball well, and he's got some weapons to throw to now. Kyler, I think lately, is playing some of his best football that he ever has. Is this, though, a upswing for a guy who kind of bounces up and down? Is this Kyler now comfortable and looking good, and his team being good? What's your take on Arizona and their group of weapons there?
I'm not, to put it one way, above market on Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. They've played the Bears and they've played the Jets in their last 2 games, and they've made it look easy, which is, maybe to be expected looking back. I don't think we expected it necessarily before those games, but they ended up being easy wins. So what was it? They do have a nice win in San Francisco this year, to say the least. The win in Miami was even good. That was a late game that they pulled out. So I feel like where I'm at right now with Murray is mostly where I've been at the whole time. I mean, there's some talent. I'm glad to see him running. There have been some explosive rushing plays from him this year, which we weren't seeing in the past, coming off an injury. So that's happened with him. What I like the most for fantasy is when you know who he's going to throw the ball to. You know where the ball is going when it comes to Arizona, almost more so than any other team in the NFL. Philadelphia is like that. Like, there's just such a narrow target tree. It's McBride, it's Harrison, and then James Conner just cannot be defeated. Another of these old running backs that a lot of us knew to try to avoid very smartly and keenly in drafts all summer, but whoops. So Conner and Kamara and many others are, basically crushing your soul if you're somebody that drafted in a very popular manner this summer, trying to avoid guys like, I had to have all the Trey Benson, because Conner, of course, will get hurt, and he's almost never on the field. So I'm okay on Arizona. I'm impressed, and I like for fantasy how easy it is. There's no second guessing. McBride always starts. They're on bye this week. Harrison pretty much always. He's developing more consistency in terms of his production. Conner, of course, doesn't always feel great, but now, like, okay, he can't be stopped. So I like that about them from a fantasy standpoint. Overall, I think they'll still have some bad games.
I think so too, and maybe one of them will be here. But I've always enjoyed Kyler Murray. I mean, I think of, sometimes I try to think back of before I had all the analytics and before we only ever cared about the Super Bowl and everyone else stinks. What would I have thought of teams and players? Kyler Murray, I would have played with Madden every single time.
Mm-hmm.
If this was 2003, right? He would have been one of my favorite players to watch in the league. So I try to keep that in mind as I'm watching him. But I also think that there's always going to be answers to Kyler Murray as long as he doesn't scoot on you. And he throws the ball kind of wildly up to his weapons. And if they don't catch it that week, it's trouble. And if they do, then he's going to be great. I respect the no risk it or whatever, but also I don't know if that's the most sustainable as opposed to like just straight drop back completions. One other one before we get to a draft that you did that you want to look at. The Atlanta Falcons. So they lose to the Saints. Another victim to the coach firing pop that always seems to happen, where the players try to prove for 1 week that it was the former coach's fault. Bijan Robinson having a great year. I was a little bit wondering how that was going to go with them, but you were huge in the offseason on drafting Atlanta Falcons. Where does that sit for you in terms of that team and their group of players?
Mostly okay, really okay if you got to Darnell Mooney, who's having a huge season, and he would have been an 11th round or so pick. So on Underdog, again, we're stacking, we're trying to win big money in tournaments and playoff weeks. We care about those weeks 15 through 17 matchups, and then you're trying to piece together, the best team you can. And like you said it, we'll refer to one of these. Some of them can look really bad, because if you're not thinking, I don't even remember all the week 17 matchups anymore, even though we're like well into the season. But the day after the schedule came out, I knew them all. Like, that's just sort of, we're drafting and we're trying to fit together. I'm trying to think as I'm talking who Atlanta plays, and I do not remember in week 17. Mostly okay, Matt. I mean, Bijan Robinson, it's not in terms of best ball Underdog. It's fine. Lineups wise, there are weeks where maybe if you're managing teams, you get frustrated. Is it an Algier game, or just what are they going to do? Cousins is putting his numbers up. London, okay. Pitts, okay. They're not killing it, especially Pitts, but at least there's a sign of life there. Mooney is really the one where you've just gotten a huge return on him. And I know the advance rates, as they're called in Underdog, which teams are going to survive top 2 out of 12 through 14 weeks to go into those tournament playoff weeks. I mean, he's somebody that you have a huge advantage over the field if you drafted Darnell Mooney, irrespective of what else, your team looked like, how many other Falcons, but you would have wanted a Mooney on a Cousins team in those drafts. So they're interesting. I thought there was a possibility this year that they would, with their schedule, win 12 or 13 games. I think that's not happening. Last week's game for them was also an example of the stupid randomness in this league, because they never should have lost, even with how that game played out. They were much the better team. They would have won the gymnastics vote in the post game there, but it doesn't work like that. So the Vikings got away with it. The Falcons did not. Fantasy wise, it's probably a B at least.
It's really funny about Kirk Cousins that throughout his career, he has this way of making heroes out of that type of player, the Darnell Mooney. You could go back to Jamison Crowder. Remember the huge numbers that he put up in Washington? And then I mentioned KJ Osborne, who just can't even get on the field for the New England Patriots. And he was getting 50 catches because that was a guy that, for whatever reason, Kirk Cousins liked to throw to. And so I'm not surprised, but I mean, that's maybe the biggest fantasy surprise of the year is someone like that. I mean, Darnell Mooney was just an afterthought completely coming into the season, and now he's one of their top wide receivers. Let's have a look at this draft. Let me see if I can get this right. Oh, I know how to do it. Hold on. We'll get you back. And here's how we'll do it. There we go. Okay. I think that's right.
One thing
we want it like.
Let's look at it that way for a minute. Yeah, please.
Here we go.
One thing about Underdog is you can't access when this draft happened. And that's something that I probably could have taken notes or something with each Best Ball Mania draft. When was this draft? Anyway, I was team 7 out of 12 here. This is a Best Ball Mania 5 draft, like the one I was just describing, where you're trying to win week 17. I see Chris Olave. I know it's Saints Raiders in week 17. So Matthew, if you're looking at this here too, which I hope you are, give me through the first 6 picks: Breece Hall, Olave, Derrick Henry, Christian Kirk out for the year, Calvin Ridley starting to wake up, Rome Odunze, not much is happening there. How do you think this team is probably doing?
It looks like a pretty tough scene outside of one player, which would be Derrick Henry. It looks like everybody else has kind of gone bust on you.
So I can scroll down so you can see a little more, right? I can do that.
Yep. I
Here
can
we
see
go.
it. Oh,
Rounds 7 through 12. Alvin Kamara, Brock Bowers, Saints Raiders in week 17. Burrow, I don't know why. I don't have Bengals here yet. Caleb Williams with Odunze. Chase Brown with Burrow. Dalton Schultz, that's Houston, Baltimore, so that correlates with Henry. Then on to Jermaine Burton in the 13th round, which, I mean, that's 2 picks before Darnell Mooney, right? We're just talking about that. Noah Fant, a player who reportedly plays for the Seahawks in the 14th round. On we go. Troy Franklin can barely see the field for Denver. Denver, Cincinnati. I'm remembering now is week 17. Khalil Herbert, who was traded to the Bengals. Nothing has happened at all. Tyrone Tracy, who's done a nice job for the Giants. And then Greg Dulcich. One more point. As you look at this team's wide receivers, now we're going to just scroll back up. So from the bottom up, I think I have 6. Franklin, pretty much a 0 every week. Burton has been a 0 every week. Odunze, okay. Ridley, a little bit lately. Kirk, out for the year. Olave, out for the year. You start 3 receivers in this format every week. This team is in first place. Right?
Well, Bowers. Yeah. I mean, Bowers is crushing it.
Henry and Kamara are starting every week. Sometimes Breece Hall in the flex. Bowers, sure. Wide receiver, I'm literally guaranteed to get at least 1-0 each week for the rest of the season. Believe me, this team is not winning the top prize. Like, this team will do well to make it to the playoffs in week 15 because I don't have some Tyrone Tracy version at wide receiver, whoever that is. The point is, it's much harder to find receivers late in drafts that are going to matter. That would have been Naylor or Ray McLeod in Atlanta, somebody, but it's still not much. It's only the occasional sort of 10-point week, and it's not winning you much. Whereas at running back, Tracy at the end of that draft is massive. Like, there's a lot of value in that. He is the Giants running back 1. He looks great. And really just one other part of that is in that format, there's only one flex position, which, you know, maybe there's not even room for Breece Hall in a given week. And the next guy drafts Bijan or Justin Jefferson, and you're losing that 1v1 all the time too. So I just think it's funny. This year has been mostly a disaster so far for players, which was, you know, like sort of the intelligentsia, if you will, in fantasy football. Is like, oh, we have to draft wide receivers all the time. And incredibly, this year, many of these receivers who are not really replaceable have gone down to injuries, including Kirk. I mean, what are they doing instead? He's not even great, but there's nobody taking those points, really. Now they've lost Lawrence. So it's just a flop. And at running back, it's the same list all the time. Henry, Kamara, Mixon, mostly Aaron Jones, certainly James Conner. These old running backs that you want to bet against, or so we thought, have held up. And that has Barkley. I mean, that has just really flipped the field this year in fantasy football. So it's funny, right? Like, that team, there's so many duds, zeros in it. Jermaine Burton. I'm just trying to correlate with give Burrow a receiver. It could still happen that by the playoff weeks, there's something there. That team doesn't have Chase or Higgins. So if there's an injury, maybe I get sort of lucky with that. But the things that make sense, you still sort of need that injury luck to go right. And I don't know, that team has had not good injury luck, but is still in the money so far.
It's a really funny draft because you end up with the best player at a couple of spots and then just a lot of nothing.
Yeah.
You are Ryan Howard at the plate, striking out over and over and then hitting a 475-foot home run. I did ask someone in the National Football League about this running back thing, because I'm just curious what people in the league are making of the fact that there are so many older running backs succeeding. The theory, and this may not hold up in the long run, but we'll see, is that we've reached a generation of running backs who were not used the way that the previous generation was.
Love it.
So they may last longer. I mean, when you look at Aaron Jones, this guy never has 250 carries, not even close. He rarely even gets 200 carries. They paired him for his entire career with somebody else. And he gets to this point and he has so much less mileage on his body than he did before. And there could be another part of it too, where quickness may have reigned supreme in bigger boxes, bigger linebackers, but now it might be following your blocks and a little bit more intelligence and understanding what the Vikings call tracks that you're supposed to be running on. That might be part of it too. And, reaching the safeties, breaking a tackle, something like that, as opposed to you got to be Chris Johnson, where you run a 4-2 and just outrun everybody for a touchdown. There's a lot more grinding. I mean, Aaron Jones last week ran for 5.2 yards a carry, and his longest run was 13 because they're playing the safeties way back. So if he beats the front, he gets tackled 8 yards down the field. Right. Well, that's a great play. It's a great run. I would be interested in explosives if explosive runs have gone down, because this was an Adrian Peterson thing. They would load the box. He breaks one tackle. He is gone. Like, there's no one to chase him down. Now you have safeties 30 yards down the field. I just wonder if the quickness thing is less valuable than knowing where to run and how to run.
Yeah, those are all really good points. I mean, also don't forget Christian McCaffrey missed the first 9 games, but now he's back, and that could still work out really well for his drafters. But that's probably been a tough season if you spent the first overall pick on him. They're all really good points. I'm thinking of one of my friends and the smartest guys in the fantasy space, Davis Maddock, who was talking about this. We're all talking about this. Like, why? What does it mean? What are we doing next year about what has been flipped here in fantasy football? And he's like, I like how he thinks. He's like, remember though, this is just one sim. Like, Rashee Rice went down because Mahomes threw a pick and then bumped into Rice on the return, and he's out for the year. The injuries are still so random. One misstep by any of these running backs we're talking about, which could still happen. Sorry for the sort of the bad vibes, but then we're kind of right back where we thought we might be when it comes to that. So I would tend to, just the way I am, not when is it overreacting? When you're wrong? Like, if you're right, then you're just reacting and thinking. If you're wrong, then you were overthinking or overreacting. I guess it sort of works in reverse. But it really is quite a story this year. And I love the point about the workload, because the teams that are benefiting from that, if that's actually a real important cause of this, are different teams. I mean, Tennessee moved on, and Green Bay with Jones, right? The Giants with Barkley. These guys, Cincinnati with Mixon. They're all sort of, the teams paid up for those guys too, and are winning for it.
Right. I mean, teams may have moved on based on a curve that was not about the future, but rather about the past. I mean, if you're talking about, well, the age curve says that guys fall off then, but those guys carried the ball 300 times, or Larry Johnson 400 times. Is Larry Johnson's 400 carry season a data point that we should use here when looking at what future running backs in today's game are going to do, right? So that's why the studies and everything else, they're all based on the past. It was kind of like when all those small receivers got drafted. I asked Kwesi Adofo-Mensah about the Tank Dell, the Addison, the Zay Flowers, and he said we just don't have data points. We don't really know, because they've never drafted receivers this small before, and we're going to have to kind of make a bet going in blind, but it worked out.
Right. And sorry, also that's different from those days is the number of quarterbacks who can run, and how that changes, the efficiency of the older running backs. I mean, Barkley with Hurts there and what he is as a runner, Barkley's not getting the touchdowns, but it's just an easier life. Henry with Jackson, oh my God, versus Ryan Tannehill, or just like, it's such a difference. It just makes the running back's life so much easier. And back in the Larry Johnson years, we didn't have hardly any quarterbacks who would ever run like this. So it's a different game, and that's what makes it interesting. Changes.
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, let's get to the pick'ems real quick here. Is really always a fascinating discussion. we're doing our pick'ems as always on Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports. I did a little draft yesterday that took about 8 minutes, I think. No surprise, the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. The other thing is too, sometimes people will say, I don't want to spend a lot of my money. I think my draft yesterday was $7, which is half of what I paid for Taco Bell. So anyway, pick'ems are super easy. You pick between 2 and 8 stats, get 20 times your money, but there's all sorts of different options for drafts for the week. Sign up with the code PURPLE, which a lot of you have done, and I appreciate. You get your special pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. Luckily, no inflation on what it costs to join a battle royale, which is what I did yesterday. So what have we got
when are we scrutinizing that draft? I mean, I just showed you mine.
Yeah, I guess after we could do it next week to see how I did, and then we can talk about how that didn't go well, probably. So anyway, what do we got for pick'ems this week?
Yeah, there's so much out there, and it can be overwhelming, but you can really, what the benefit is, you can be this madman that drafts everywhere and everything maxes out, or just really pick what's right for you. Be more judicious, and that's a fun tournament. So tomorrow night we have Washington at Philadelphia, and similar to last week when we had Cincinnati, Baltimore, as we record on Wednesday morning, there's one key injury that we don't know about yet, or at least I don't, that's reflected in the pick'em options, and that's Brian Robinson. Whether he plays for Washington, he's missed the last 2 games. There are no options, or at least there weren't 2 hours ago, for Robinson or for Austin Eckler in that Washington backfield. So I did place a pick'em nonetheless, but I left the Washington backfield out of it. It sounds like with Robinson, that could go either way. I think it was surprising even 2 weeks ago that he didn't play against the Giants, and he missed last week's game too. So you might want to wait to find out what the deal is there and then react accordingly. But this is sort of the chumpy kind of move here, Matthew. Like if you're somebody who just picks hires, then I think, you're not well respected in the pick'em community. You want to be sort of more on the lower side. But nonetheless, I went higher on 5 different pick'em options here. Let's say no Robinson. Even if he does play, I kind of like him, by the way, if he does play for a touchdown bet. I mean, touchdown bets are always pretty random, but I think Robinson is sort of positive in that department. But I'm going higher on Daniels passing yards, 226.5. They were fine against Pittsburgh, could have won that game, but I just sort of vibes based here, thinking that there is like maybe a little bit with a rookie quarterback, you're kind of always waiting for the next shoe to drop, like it's just going to eventually turn badly. I don't know. Like he's still a top 6 or 7 MVP candidate, and I like him to put up a nice game here in a tough spot. He did it in Cincinnati early in the season in prime time. I doubt he's going to be daunted by the spotlight here. So higher on Daniels, and then with that, I'll go higher on Terry McLaurin, who's had a very nice season. Also not a real popular fantasy draft pick before the year, but very consistent results from McLaurin. Higher 4.5 receptions. And in a Zach Ertz revenge game, higher 3.5 receptions for Ertz. Daniels has really leaned on him quite a bit this year. I think this is kind of an easy one, higher on Saquon Barkley, 1.5 catches. And so I placed those 4, and the payout was just not that exciting because they're a little bit lean toward the likelier side on maybe all 4 of them. So I'm throwing in, no pun intended, a Jalen Hurts pick, higher than half an interception in this game. 5 for 5, 10 pays 109.
Okay, my random one. Philadelphia is going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball with their quarterback. They're going to give it to Saquon, which means Bobby Wagner is going to be involved. And I don't always see linebackers on Underdog, but they've got one here. I am going to go with the higher on 4.5 solo tackles for Bobby Wagner. He's going to be a madman in this game. He's going to be all over the field.
By the way, before we wrap, I like that pick. Are you ready for some breaking news? Are you sitting down?
Oh, what's that?
the Colts went back to Richardson. Rest of season.
I mean,
can you believe that?
What can you
franchise.
say?
What a franchise. Wait, I've got a Colts. I'm trying to make sure that my Buffalo friends notice this is not just me repping Kansas City. I mean, Kansas City at Buffalo. We got the Colts Jets, Super Bowl III back here. I am just shocked. I love it. I think it's what they should do, but I am just shocked. I watched Indianapolis Buffalo last week. You saw the Colts the week before. The most criminally egregious thing about them is that on like 3rd and 1, they don't use Richardson. Like the politics of it all. We can't use our freakishly great athletic quarterback on 3rd and 1. We're going to make your job as a defense so much easier. And the Bills had a couple of key stops in a relatively close game because there's no threat from Flacco to move at all. Like it's just going to be Jonathan Taylor or a drop back, and that just did not work. I mean, Richardson should be kind of like a guaranteed first down in those spots. They don't use him. I can't wait to read into this or read up on this to see like what happened. But I mean, this what a what a team.
I've got an idea. Relegation. There's several franchises in this league just need to go play each other for the right to be back in the NFL. The Indianapolis Colts, the Chicago Bears, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Jets. Just go play each other all season for the chance to return to play the teams who have any clue about what they're doing. I mean, and if they had actually come out and said, like Carolina did, we are going to give him a break because it's just become a little overwhelming. And I think he needs to take a step back. They named Flacco the starter for the rest of the year and then took him out for 2 weeks. I mean, you just look like a total clown show after doing that. It would have made the messaging would have made it make so much more sense. Like Anthony just needs to take a step back. He needs to watch some film. He needs to work in practice a little bit, and he needs a mental break right now because he's overwhelmed because he's really young. That's fine. No one would have even questioned that. They would say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Play him for 3 weeks, bring him back, and it's fine. To do it like, no, he's the starter for the rest of the year. Anthony Richardson is dead to us. And then, we actually saw Joe Flacco play, and now we're going back. I mean, that's just bad.
First drive of the game against the Bills, the fans were booing Flacco. They're booing the Colts. I mean, the cliche is always like, if you listen to the fans, you're going to sit with them. Not usually. Usually fans kind of know their interests are the same as the owners, at least in theory, which is like the long term, where the coach is going to be fired if he doesn't win. Like it's just contrasting motives, really. And so the fans had a point. I thought it was funny last week. Flacco, I think, had 4 turnovers in the game. And even Monday, man, this coach, I don't know I can't wait to see what he says. Even Monday, Steichen reaffirmed like Flacco is going to play. And now it's 2 days later and he's not. It's amazing.
And then Jim Irsay told him, no, actually, he's not. Man. Oh, sorry.
They are at the Jets. I don't know how startable Richardson is. I mean, you've got 4 teams on bye. Flacco is really not startable in that spot. The Jets haven't been great. Newsflash. But they're still, fantasy-wise at least, let's hope there's progress and we get to a point with Richardson where you get the player you drafted and they drafted, which is this incredible runner who can do enough in the passing game to, survive, to win in fantasy, to hopefully not make Josh Downs irrelevant and the other pass catchers, which was a simple Flacco plays. You start those guys. He doesn't, you don't. So that's another thing here, but I'm glad for it.
I've just heard over the last 2 years such good things about Anthony Richardson from his character perspective and all that. And the way that he dealt with this, I thought was really good. Like he didn't go demand a trade or put it on Instagram or whatever else. He said, I need to work on things and everything else. You just get angry. Like at this point, you just get angry. Like what? Like stop ruining Anthony Richardson, please. Right. Maybe I'm sure Bears feel the same exact way about Caleb Williams. But once you've lost the RCA Dome, that means you got to make a change.
O'Connell with Richardson was really nice.
Yep, it definitely was. So anyway, We'll do it again next week, and who knows what quarterbacks will be ruined by then. So appreciate your time as always, Mike. The Deep End Fantasy Football Show is your show, and we'll talk to y'all later. Football.